unfold.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are stepping back into one of the most transformative and ruthlessly ambitious periods in history, the late 19th century, the Gilded Age. We often think of this era as in terms of, steel barons, oil tycoons, or railroad empires, but the conflict we're diving into today literally built the invisible nervous system of the modern world.
Indeed, you're dissecting the war of the currents. But if you believe this was merely a technical debate between physics professors arguing about direct current versus alternating current, you are missing the scale of the fight.
Absolutely.
Our sources reveal a savage, high-stakes business thriller involving outright corporate espionage, the deliberate manipulation of public safety fears, and the weaponization of the press to destroy a competitor.
It's the origin story of our electrical grid, and it's a story defined by three monumental figures whose collisions set the course for global technology. First, you had the incumbent, the undisputed king, Thomas Alva Edison, the Wizard of Menlo Park, who was firmly entrenched as the figurehead of the DC copper empire.
Edison represented the establishment. He wasn't just an inventor. He was a businessman who had successfully built the world's first true utility company, integrating every single piece of the power supply chain under his control.
Yeah.
He had everything to lose.
Everything. Then you had George Westinghouse, the disciplined Pittsburgh industrialist. This was a man who understood systems, having already revolutionized transportation as the inventor of the railway air brake.
Right.
He saw the inherent limitations of DC and was willing to bet his entire fortune and reputation on the efficient but, largely unproven AC system.
Westinghouse brought a sophisticated, logistics-focused mindset. He saw electricity not as a localized luxury product for lighting downtown Manhattan, but as a broad utility, like natural gas, that needed to be transported over vast distances to power industry and homes across the continent.
And finally, the wild card, the true source of the revolution, Nikola Tesla, a mercurial, intensely mathematical genius, an immigrant who held the ultimate key to AC's success, the polyphase motor. Without his specific genius, AC would have remained a lighting novelty.
Our mission today is to go far beyond the textbook comparison of electrons. We are dissecting the true levers of power that decided this conflict. The financial maneuvers, primarily orchestrated by the colossal figure of J.P. Morgan, and the shadow operations executed by Edison's proxy, Harold P. Brown.
Okay.
We want to understand how this conflict culminated in the global technological standard we rely on every second of every day. Crucially, this war didn't just decide a power standard. It established the architecture of the modern corporate conglomerate, definitively marking the moment the era of the solitary inventor hero was consumed by the needs of industrial capital.
So let's start with Goliath. To truly appreciate why Thomas Edison fought with such visceral intensity, you have to understand the sheer overwhelming physical and financial investment he had already made in his DC system.
Right.
Following the 1882 launch of the Pearl Street Station in Lower Manhattan, Edison had created a fully vertically integrated monopoly.
That phrase, vertically integrated, is the crux of his power and his vulnerability. Edison didn't merely sell kilowatt hours. He manufactured the massive steam engines and dynamos that generated the power, the intricate meters that measured usage, the delicate incandescent bulbs that lit the interiors, and, most expensively, the heavy copper cables that carried the current.
He owned the entire stack.
The entire stack, exactly, which meant he had millions in assets tied up exclusively in the DC technology chain.
And this brings us immediately to the fundamental, inescapable law of physics that became the Achilles heel of the Edison empire, the limitation of direct current.
Right. DC, by definition, is a unidirectional flow of electrical charge, essentially running like water in a single direction through a pipe.
Okay.
For residential safety, a critical priority in those early days, especially with exposed wires everywhere, the current had to be generated and delivered at a low voltage, typically 110 volts.
That seems entirely reasonable. Safety dictates the low voltage, but this is where the laws of physics brutally punish that decision when you try to scale it up.
Precisely. We are talking about Joule's first law, which dictates the relationship between current, resistance, and power loss. The power lost in transmission is proportional to the square of the current.
The square of the current, okay.
Yeah, and here's the critical inverse relationship. Power is current multiplied by voltage. So if you need to transmit a fixed amount of power, and you must keep the voltage low for safety, the current has to be massive.
So low voltage forces you to use high current. And high current by the square of the current, that I squared, generates a colossal amount of heat due to the resistance of the wire.
Exactly. The energy is literally burning up as heat before it reaches the customer's lamp. This heat loss over distance made long-distance transmission under low voltage fantastically inefficient. It was physically impossible to send power 10 miles away without losing like 90% of it along the way.
So how did Edison attempt to overcome this relentless heat penalty imposed by physics?
By massively, dramatically increasing the size of the conductor itself. Resistance is also inversely proportional to the cross-sectional area of the wire. To drop the resistance low enough to get power a meaningful distance, Edison required conductors of astonishing thickness. Our sources note these were copper cables, often as wide as a man's wrist, sometimes even thicker.
Wow.
They had to be bundled underground beneath city streets, just filling the conduits.
Wait, if copper was the biggest expense, couldn't Edison have tried to use cheaper metals like iron or aluminum, which were also conductors? Why was expensive copper non-negotiable? This speaks directly to the financial ceiling.
That's a crucial point. While iron is a conductor, its resistance is dramatically higher than copper. Aluminum was available, but difficult to splice reliably at the time and still quite expensive.
Okay.
Copper had the optimal balance of high conductivity and relative workability. Even if Edison used a cheaper, less efficient metal, he would have had to make the cables exponentially thicker, perhaps the size of an entire leg, just to maintain the same power delivery.
So the logistical cost of just laying those massive ducts and burying those enormous conductors under every city street would have made the entire project bankrupt from day one.
Absolutely. The reliance on extremely dense copper wasn't an arbitrary choice. It was a physical necessity to make the low-voltage DC system function at all. And that expense gives us the copper empire. The cost of copper was the single largest non-negotiable capital expenditure. This hardware requirement imposed the infamous physical constraint known as the 1-mile tether. DC stations could efficiently serve customers only within about a 1-mile radius before the power loss became cripplingly uneconomical.
Which means to electrify a massive, sprawling industrial hub like New York, let alone expand into the suburbs or connect large cities, Edison would have had to purchase land, build a costly new coal-burning power station, and hire staff every few blocks.
The scaling problem was insurmountable. By 1887, Edison had 121 central stations, which sounds like dominance, but it was a fragmented, decentralized system.
Right.
Electricity remained a product for the wealthy or for commercial buildings in the central business districts, where customer density could temporarily justify the immense land and infrastructure cost. And crucially, the bankers saw this ceiling. J.P. Morgan, who was actively building his empire through industrial consolidation, looked at this fragmented market, 121 separate stations, constrained by a mile, and realized the investment could never achieve continental scale.
The moment the physical law prohibited expansion, the financial structure became doomed.
Exactly. The market was ready for a technology that could defy the tether.
And that technological defiance arrived in the form of George Westinghouse, the disciplined industrialist who focused not on the bulb, but on the delivery system. He's the antithesis of Edison, a man who saw electricity as a grand utility, not just a localized fluid for lighting.
Westinghouse's background as the inventor of the air brake is critical here. He understood complex, long-distance logistics, the coordination of systems across hundreds of miles, and the necessity of standardization.
Right.
When he encountered the European Gilded-Age transformer system, he didn't just see a curiosity, he saw the solution to the entire DC economic problem.
Let's truly dissect the technical superiority of alternating current, because this is where the physical breakthrough dictates the business model. How did AC fundamentally shatter Edison's 1-mile tether restriction?
Well, the genius is the nature of the flow. Unlike DC, alternating current constantly reverses its direction dozens of times per second. In America, it's 60 hertz.
So it's oscillating back and forth.
Exactly. And this constant change in the magnetic field allows for the miracle component of the system, the transformer.
Help the listener visualize that. If DC is a steady stream of water, what is AC?
AC is like a piston moving rapidly back and forth in a cylinder, which creates the wave-like energy flow. The transformer, which only works because of this oscillation, is essentially an electrical gear shift.
An electrical gear shift, I like that.
It uses magnetic induction to manipulate the voltage almost instantly and with incredible efficiency.
So we generate the electricity at a relatively low voltage, say 440 volts. Then what happens?
You step it up. Using the transformer, you can take that 440 volts and step it up to, say, 10,000 volts, or even 50,000 volts, depending on the transmission distance.
Okay.
Because power loss is linked to current, remember, that I squared R. If you increase the voltage by a factor of 100, you can decrease the current by a factor of 100.
That's a massive reduction in current. And what does that mean for the wires?
It means that, thanks to the reduction in that I squared, the heat loss virtually disappears. Instead of thick, wrist-wide copper cables, Westinghouse could transmit high-voltage, low-current power over thin, inexpensive wires for hundreds of miles with negligible energy loss.
And then, at the customer's end, a local transformer steps the high voltage back down to the safe 110-volt level for use in the home.
Exactly.
That economic advantage is just staggering. You've moved from building a new local power plant every mile to building one enormous central station outside the city limits where land is cheap and you have access to major fuel or hydro sources.
You replace millions in copper conduit investment with vastly cheaper, lighter transmission lines run on poles.
It was an immediate, overwhelming business case. Westinghouse wasn't just competing on price. He was competing on a fundamental, scalable system architecture that Edison could not physically replicate with DC.
By 1887, Westinghouse was aggressively installing AC systems in dozens of towns across the Midwest and South, undercutting Edison's rates dramatically because his infrastructure cost base was so much lower.
This wasn't just competition. This was an existential threat to the copper empire. If Westinghouse succeeded, every mile of thick copper conductor Edison had buried, every DC dynamo manufactured, and every dollar invested in his patents was rendered worthless overnight.
The war, for Edison, was now a fight for survival against economic and physical obsolescence.
Right.
But again, in the late 1880s, AC still had a critical technical weakness. It was great for lighting, but it could not power the heavy industrial machinery that DC could. This gap was Edison's last hope for technical defense.
Which brings us to Nikola Tesla.
To reiterate, while AC distribution was superior for lighting, it desperately lacked a functional electric motor. Industry factories, elevators, electric streetcars, printing presses needed reliable motors, and DC systems had the technical advantage here.
So early AC motors just weren't very good.
They were terrible. They relied on brushes and commutators, complex mechanical parts that sparked, required constant maintenance, and were prone to catastrophic failure.
This is the moment Nikola Tesla arrives on the scene in 1884. He lands in New York, a complete unknown, but armed with a singular revolutionary insight: the rotating magnetic field. He is the ultimate theoretician, the antithesis of Edison's famed trial-and-error empiricism.
It is said that Edison never fully grasped mathematics or theoretical physics. He relied on ceaseless practical experimentation.
The old 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration line?
Right. Tesla, conversely, could construct and test entire complex machines entirely within his mind, achieving theoretical perfection before a single component was manufactured.
Our sources vividly contrast their styles. Edison's laboratory was a place of feverish diligence, where hundreds of men tried thousands of experiments. Tesla's lab later was quiet, because the true work had already been completed mentally.
Tesla was initially hired by the Edison Machine Works to address chronic, real-world failures in Edison's massive DC dynamos. These were constantly breaking down, requiring expensive repairs and wasting power.
And this leads us to the founding myth that detonated the War of the Currents: the disputed $50,000 bonus.
Tesla's account states that Edison promised him $50,000, an absolutely enormous sum, roughly $1.4 million in modern currency, if he could successfully redesign the inefficient DC dynamos and motors.
Wow, that's life-changing money.
Absolutely. And Tesla, the serious, driven immigrant who took the master at his word, labored intensely, often round the clock for months, and delivered a complete overhaul, dramatically increasing the efficiency and reliability of the DC machines.
He delivered. And when he approached Edison to claim the agreed-upon fortune,
the response was legendary and devastating. Edison, reportedly laughing, dismissed the promise as a joke, telling Tesla, "You don't understand our American humor."
Oh, that's just brutal.
Instead of the $50,000, Tesla was offered a paltry $10 a week raise.
A raise from what, maybe $18 a week to $28? That is an insult so profound it's hard to grasp. You've just alienated the greatest mind in electrical engineering for $10 purely because he was a naive immigrant who believed in the value of his work.
Tesla was profoundly insulted. He quit immediately. He later stated that the episode galvanized a lifelong resentment of the establishment and the corporate mindset that exploited pure genius for profit.
And it resulted in one of the most staggering personal setbacks imaginable.
Yeah, because the man who held the intellectual property that would define the 20th century found himself literally on the streets.
From 1886 to 1887, Nikola Tesla was digging ditches for $2 a day in New York City to survive the winter. He lost his first company to unscrupulous financiers, and he was working manual labor, struggling just to eat.
It was a humiliation that few technological giants have ever faced. But those ditches led him to others who understood his value, leading eventually to George Westinghouse.
And Westinghouse was desperate for a motor that could capitalize on his superior AC distribution system.
Westinghouse recognized the rotating magnetic field technology as the Holy Grail. Tesla's polyphase induction motor was revolutionary because it had no commutator, no brushes, and therefore no sparking or mechanical wear.
It was just pure induction.
Pure induction, a reliable workhorse perfectly suited for heavy industry. This single invention ended AC's reliance on lighting alone.
When Westinghouse met Tesla, the contrast with Edison must have been sharp. Westinghouse offered a highly respectful and financially staggering deal. $60,000 in cash and stock, plus that crucial royalty clause, $2.50 for every horsepower of AC electricity sold.
That royalty was the financial weapon. It cemented the partnership and simultaneously militarized the conflict. With the polyphase motor, AC was now functionally superior for both lighting and industry. Edison could no longer compete on efficiency, scale, or functionality.
So he had to resort to the only weapon he had left: fear.
Exactly.
This is where the story shifts from a technical competition to outright vicious corporate warfare. Edison, realizing he could not defeat the laws of physics, launched one of the earliest, most coordinated corporate smear campaigns in American history.
And the strategy was brutally simple. Brand alternating current as the death current, exploiting the public's total ignorance about high voltage.
It was a sophisticated psychological operation. Edison's argument, repeated endlessly in the papers he controlled, was that AC, transmitted at thousands of volts, was inherently too dangerous for residential use, even though he knew the transformer safely stepped the voltage down at the final stage.
He was weaponizing the voltage number itself. To make this abstract fear concrete, he needed public spectacle and demonstrable death.
But the Wizard of Menlo Park had a carefully crafted public persona, built on safe inventions like the phonograph and the light bulb. He couldn't be seen slaughtering dogs.
Right.
So he used a proxy, a shadow operative, Harold P. Brown.
Brown presented himself as a highly moral, independent electrical expert, a crusader acting purely in the public interest to protect children and homeowners from the alleged dangers of Westinghouse's high-voltage technology. He was, to the public, an objective safety advocate.
Except he wasn't. The exposure came in August 1889, when stolen letters published in the New York Sun completely unmasked the conspiracy.
Those documents proved definitively that Brown was financially and logistically dependent on Edison. The letter showed Edison was providing Brown with laboratory space at the West Orange facility, staff assistants, and equipment, all to conduct a fraudulent staged safety campaign.
And Brown explicitly requested Edison's help to prick the bubble of Westinghouse and scare off potential investors.
And those staged tests were where the true cruelty and scientific fraud occurred. Our sources describe how Brown would pay local children 25 cents for every stray dog they could capture, turning the West Orange lab into a macabre stage for comparative electrocution.
That's just awful. The methodology was rigged from the start to yield the desired headline, right?
Oh, completely. A typical test involved two phases. First, Brown would apply a significant shock, say 1,000 volts of direct current. DC, due to its continuous flow, often caused severe trauma, but sometimes allowed for survival if the shock was brief.
Okay.
Second, Brown would subject the same weakened animal to a much lower voltage of alternating current, perhaps 300 to 700 volts, which would kill the animal due to the severe rapid muscle contractions and heart fibrillation inherent in AC exposure.
So the conclusion, delivered to the sensationalist press, was always the same. AC, even at a lower voltage, is scientifically proven to be deadlier than DC.
It was a complete misrepresentation, ignoring the fact that the initial DC shock weakened the animal, and that AC transmission voltages were irrelevant to the safety of the household circuit.
And Brown took this roadshow public. The 1888 Columbia College demonstration is infamous. He dragged a 76-pound Newfoundland dog onto the stage in front of reporters.
Witnesses described it as a chaotic horror show, stating the scene made a bullfight look like a petting zoo. Despite the palpable discomfort of the audience, the press ran the sensational headlines Edison had paid for.
They didn't stop at dogs. They progressed to calves and full-size horses at the Edison lab with the explicit goal of demonstrating that the executioner's current could kill any living creature.
And this propaganda had a very specific legislative goal. Brown actively lobbied the New York State legislature to impose a limit on all electrical circuits, a mandatory cap of 300 volts.
If that law had passed, it would have immediately outlawed Westinghouse's entire transmission system, which operated in the thousands of volts, while conveniently leaving Edison's low-voltage DC system compliant and dominating the market.
It was a comprehensive plan. Generate fear, provide false scientific proof, and then use that fear to legislate the competition out of existence.
To truly embed this terror into the public consciousness, they needed an ultimate, undeniable display of lethality, something they tried to codify into language itself.
They attempted to coin the term to Westinghouse as a visceral synonym for being electrocuted. The narrative was simple. Do you want the Westinghousing current running through the wires that light your children's nursery?
Wow.
To make that slur stick, they needed a state-sanctioned death linked directly to AC.
This brings us to the most cynical chapter of the entire conflict, the introduction of the electric chair. It started with good intentions, as a quest for a more humane form of execution in the progressive late 19th century, replacing the often slow and clumsy brutality of hanging.
But Edison saw a strategic opportunity to irrevocably taint his rival's technology. Despite his personal opposition to the death penalty, he testified before the New York State Commission searching for this humane method.
And his testimony was clear and calculated.
Absolutely. The most effective and legal method of execution would be electricity, provided, of course, that alternating current was used.
It was a masterful, though morally repugnant move. He was essentially telling the state, if you want to kill someone effectively, you must use Westinghouse's deadly current. The state accepted his recommendation, and the electrical execution law was passed in 1888.
Westinghouse, to his credit, understood the trap immediately. He refused point-blank to sell his AC generators for use in executions, famously stating they would have done better with an axe, recognizing the high probability of a botched, brutal affair.
That refusal forced Edison and Brown into an even deeper conspiracy. Since they couldn't buy the machines legitimately, they used straw buyers, third-party agents who disguised the ultimate recipient, to surreptitiously purchase 3 used Westinghouse AC dynamos.
And they were then shipped to Auburn State Prison. This ensured the necessary technical setup. When the execution inevitably happened, the resulting headlines would inevitably link the deadly act directly to Westinghouse's machinery.
It was a calculated murder by proxy, using the state executioner as the unwitting agent of Edison's corporate warfare.
The victim was William Kemmler, a vegetable peddler convicted of murder. The execution, on August 6, 1890, was intended to be a scientific triumph, a quick, clean death administered by modern technology.
The result was the exact opposite, an unprecedented, grotesque failure that revolted the public.
The executioners were completely untrained and inexact with voltage levels and application time. They applied the current for 17 seconds. Kemmler slumped over, unconscious. The attending doctors, horrified but rushing, prematurely declared the victim dead.
But then came the true horror.
As witnesses watched, the corpse began to gasp, heave, and convulse. Purplish foam appeared in his mouth. Spectators were screaming. Panic erupted in the chamber.
Unbelievable.
The executioners, realizing the man was still alive, frantically scrambled to restart the generator. The current was reapplied, this time held closed for a full 4 minutes.
4 minutes.
Witnesses reported a truly medieval scene. The stench of burning flesh filled the room. Kemmler's hair and skin were singed, and blood vessels beneath his skin ruptured and carbonized. One journalist described the entire affair as an awful spectacle.
The press reaction was devastating. The New York Times headlined the event as far worse than hanging, and many editorials condemned the cruel and unusual punishment.
Right, it was a total validation of Westinghouse's prediction of brutality. But here is the critical turning point. The smear campaign failed to achieve its strategic goal.
How so?
The sheer utility of AC proved more powerful than the fear. While the public was horrified by the execution, they did not suddenly demand the dismantling of AC lines. The failure was rightly attributed to the incompetence of the executioners and the cynical manipulation by Edison, not the inherent evil of the current itself.
So the slur Westinghousing never stuck in the common lexicon?
It never stuck.
Yeah.
And the war now shifted definitively to the financial arena, where the real money fought the real battle.
While the propagandists were busy with dynamos and dog cages, The real battlefield for several years was the patent courtroom.
Between 1885 and 1892, Edison and Westinghouse engaged in what was often called the 7 Years' War of the electrical industry. They filed literally hundreds of lawsuits against each other, tying up patents, generating constant legal fees, and draining operational capital from both companies.
This level of legal attrition was financially ruinous, and this is where the financial giants step in. J.P. Morgan, Edison's primary financier, abhorred this ruinous competition.
Morgan made his massive fortune by consolidating fractured, inefficient industries like railroads into powerful, integrated monopolies. He knew two things. The industry must be consolidated, and Edison's DC technology was the losing horse.
Edison's stubborn adherence to DC, driven by pride and sunk cost, was now a massive financial liability preventing the rationalization of the industry.
The bankers moved first against their own man, prioritizing profit over the founder's ego. The marginalization of Edison was rapid and brutal.
By 1889, he had already lost majority control of his own company and earlier financial maneuvers. The final corporate coup arrived in 1892. Morgan engineered a massive merger between Edison General Electric and a rival, highly successful AC company called the Thomson-Houston Electric Company.
The result was the formation of General Electric, GE. And in the final, symbolic indignity to the founder, the name Edison was immediately dropped from the corporate title.
Wow. He was effectively ousted, a figurehead who had refused to adapt to technological reality.
And the new GE management, driven by Morgan's mandate, immediately began pivoting the consolidated company toward adopting the superior alternating current technology.
So GE, the corporate successor to Edison, essentially gave up the technical fight and adopted AC. But this wasn't the end of Westinghouse's troubles. Just as AC was poised for triumph, the entire American economy collapsed.
The panic of 1893, triggered by severe railroad bankruptcies and a massive economic depression, hit Westinghouse Electric hard. They had expanded aggressively, relying on debt to compete with the now massive GE. Credit markets froze completely, and their creditors issued a devastating ultimatum.
Which was?
Shed the liabilities immediately, or the entire company would be liquidated.
And we return to the wild card, Nikola Tesla. What was the single largest, most terrifying liability on Westinghouse's balance sheet at that moment?
That original 1888 royalty contract. The $2.50 per horsepower owed to Nikola Tesla.
That must have looked like a black hole in the books.
An infinite black hole. As AC began to replace DC across the entire continent, powering not just lights but every factory, every elevator, and every streetcar, that royalty was mathematically projected to reach millions and eventually billions of dollars. The bankers looked at this potentially infinite escalating liability and demanded the contract be canceled.
They would not lend another cent while that clause remained in effect.
Not 1 cent. This brings us to the ultimate dramatic confrontation, detailed in the accounts from Pittsburgh. George Westinghouse, facing liquidation, approached Tesla and laid out the stark reality. Your decision determines the fate of the Westinghouse company.
So if Tesla insisted on enforcing his royalty contract, the company would be liquidated, the patents would be scooped up cheaply by GE, and the AC system, Tesla's life's work, would be either buried or rebranded under General Electric's name.
Tesla's response is what sets him apart from every other financial titan of the Gilded Age. He was not motivated by wealth. He was motivated by the vindication of his technology and his desire to see his system light the world.
And he had a deep sense of loyalty to Westinghouse, the one man who had treated him fairly after the Edison humiliation.
Exactly. He reportedly said, "I am not interested in money, Mr. Westinghouse. I am interested in leaving something behind for humankind."
And in one of the greatest financial sacrifices in human history, he tore up the contract.
He tore it up. He walked away from royalties that would have made him, by any reasonable estimate, one of the wealthiest individuals in the world. A fortune that could have rivaled Rockefeller, Morgan, or Carnegie.
He accepted a lump sum payment, estimated at a mere $216,000, which paid off some debts and provided a small base.
This single, noble, and deeply naive act saved the Westinghouse Electric Company from immediate collapse, cleared its balance sheet of the toxic liability, and ensured the triumph of the AC system globally.
However, by sacrificing that immense financial security, he also tragically sealed his own fate for the decades to come.
He did.
With Westinghouse saved from the bankers, the company needed a definitive public stage to prove to the entire world, not just the engineers, but the average person, that AC was safe, reliable, and above all, the future.
And that stage was the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, famously dubbed the White City. This was the crucial technological exorcism of Edison's ghosts, the final, undeniable proof that the death current narrative was a lie.
The exposition planners wanted to illuminate the entire fairground in a spectacular display of electric light, something that would symbolize America's entry into the modern age.
The bidding war became the final direct skirmish. General Electric, inheriting Edison's hubris and expecting to win based on size, bid a staggering $554,000, proposing a hybrid DCAC system.
And Westinghouse, desperate for the publicity regardless of cost, undercut them brutally.
He bid $399,000. It was a strategic loss leader. He knew he would barely break even or perhaps even lose money on the project, but the sheer exposure of lighting a fair that would draw millions of visitors was priceless marketing.
He won the contract.
He won. And GE did not take this loss gracefully. They retaliated with a brilliant piece of corporate sabotage.
How so?
They controlled the key patents to Edison's incandescent light bulb, the only practical bulb available at the time, and refused to sell them to Westinghouse. Without bulbs, Westinghouse's AC generators were useless, and the White City would stand dark.
A potentially crippling move, demonstrating the power of patent monopolies. But the Westinghouse engineers showed incredible industrial agility. In a frantic 6-month race against the clock, they circumvented the Edison patent.
They did. The Edison patent relied on a fully sealed glass globe with a specific base. Westinghouse engineers developed the stopper lamp, a 2-piece bulb where the internal filaments and vacuum tube were plugged into the glass casing like a cork rather than being sealed shut.
Clever technical workaround that bypassed the patent requirements entirely.
And they manufactured hundreds of thousands of these bulbs in time for the opening. The moment of truth arrived on May 1st, 1893. President Grover Cleveland pressed the main key, and instantly, 100,000 incandescent lamps powered entirely by the Tesla Westinghouse AC system bathed the White City in soft, brilliant light.
Searchlights swept the night sky. The visual impact must have been profound.
For the 27 million visitors, the death current narrative evaporated into thin air. AC was proven safe, reliable, easy to install, and stunningly beautiful. The psychological victory was complete.
And the technical validation was equally undeniable. Lord Kelvin, the internationally renowned British physicist and chair of the International Niagara Commission, who had been a prominent skeptic of AC, toured the exposition.
He was utterly converted by the display. He reportedly concluded the only way to do it is with the Tesla system. That endorsement from the world's leading physicist of the time was the final nail in the coffin of the DC system.
And that leads us to the ultimate definitive prize, Niagara Falls. Harnessing the immense, raw energy of the falls to power the massive industrial hub of Buffalo, 26 miles away.
This was the greatest civil engineering challenge of the century. DC transmission over 26 miles was economically absurd. The copper required would have made the cost astronomical.
This project required high-voltage transmission, and after the success of Chicago and the endorsement of Lord Kelvin, the decision was inevitable.
Following the Chicago triumph, the commission awarded the monumental contract to build the power generation system to George Westinghouse in October 1893. This was the final, definitive validation that AC was the future.
And in a wonderful twist that truly signaled the end of the corporate hostilities, the victory of physics over pride, the contract for the crucial transmission lines and transformers was awarded to General Electric.
GE, having merged with AC companies and accepted the laws of physics and economics, licensed the necessary Tesla patents, and was now actively building the system alongside its former rival.
On November 16, 1896, the system went live, sending 37 megawatts of power at 25 hertz 26 miles to Buffalo. The Niagara Falls Gazette captured the magnitude of the moment, declaring that they had caused the Niagara River to flow uphill.
The electrical age had arrived, and the War of the Currents was finally definitively over.
As we conclude this deep dive, we need to address and correct a common historical misconception often cited as the final act of this war: the Topsy, the elephant myth.
Yes. The 1903 electrocution of Topsy, an elephant at Luna Park in Coney Island, was indeed documented by the Edison Manufacturing Company film crew. It is frequently and incorrectly cited as a final, desperate salvo by Edison in the current war.
But the timeline makes this impossible.
Exactly. By 1903, the War of the Currents had been over for nearly a decade. Edison had long lost control of his electrical interests. Topsy was executed by Luna Park officials because she had killed 3 men and was deemed unmanageable, not as part of a competitive demonstration.
While Edison's film crew documented it because sensational deaths drew crowds and sold film reels, Thomas Edison himself was not present, nor was it a tactical move in the business war.
Right. And ironically, the electricity used to execute Topsy was drawn from the local grid, which by 1903 was almost certainly an alternating current system. It serves as a grim coda to the era of animal experimentation initiated by Brown, but it was not a strategic move by Edison.
We must reflect on the deeply tragic fates of the men who forged the grid that defines our civilization. They built the modern world, but the process consumed them.
Thomas Edison, the self-proclaimed wizard, though he lost the battle for the grid standard, remained resilient. He pivoted successfully to other ventures, pioneering the phonograph, motion pictures, and improving battery technology.
But in private moments, he allegedly admitted to his son that his dismissal of AC technology and his refusal to listen to the superior mind of Tesla was the greatest error of his extensive career. The error cost him the industrial future.
Then there's George Westinghouse, the disciplined victor who saved the AC standard. He unfortunately faced renewed financial instability. The Panic of 1907 struck a second devastating blow, and unlike in 1893, he could not withstand the pressure.
He was forced out. He lost control of the very company he founded and saved, ultimately dying in 1914, alienated from the corporate giant that bore his name. His reward for winning the technology war was losing the financial control war.
And Nikola Tesla, the genius who walked away from a billion-dollar fortune, suffered the most poignant fate. Without the massive, steady stream of royalty income, he lacked the critical capital necessary to fund his increasingly ambitious and expensive later projects, like the colossal transmission attempt known as the Wardenclyffe Tower.
His poverty and isolation grew. He became eccentric, relying on increasingly meager grants and dying alone and debt-ridden in a New York hotel room in 1943. He had traded personal wealth for the vindication of his technology, a noble but devastating choice in a world governed by capital.
The War of the Currents ultimately demonstrated that having the superior technology, alternating current, was necessary, but emphatically not sufficient for victory. Victory required the massive industrial capacity and logistics of a Westinghouse, and critically, the financial shielding and consolidation enforced by a figure like J.P. Morgan.
Edison's copper empire failed because it fought physics and economics simultaneously. Yet his ruthless tactics, the smear campaigns, the patent trolling, the legislative manipulation, created a detailed, lasting playbook for corporate warfare that sadly persists in technological sectors even today.
They learned the brutal lesson that controlling the narrative and the finance can be just as important as controlling the patent.
So what does this all mean for us?
The AC grid became the nervous system of the 20th century, enabling the continental electrification and the decentralization of industry, forever changing how we live and work. It was the ultimate triumph of physics and scalable economics. But the profound price of that victory was the financial independence of the very inventors who forged it, all of whom were ultimately consumed or marginalized by the powerful, consolidated corporations that won the financial aspect of the war.
It leaves us with a provocative final thought, an irony that lingers in the air like the scent of ozone. The one man who possessed the critical, physics-defying genius, Nikola Tesla, was also the only one willing to sacrifice a future empire of personal wealth, ensuring his technology's success at the cost of his own future. When we look at the financial titans of today's highly capitalized tech world, those who are obsessed with market dominance and personal control, we must ask, would the next great, continent-defining technological leap require a similar billion-dollar sacrifice from its inventor just to survive the scrutiny and hunger of capital?
A profound question indeed, especially as we debate the future of energy infrastructure today.
We'll leave you with that thought to mull over. Thanks for diving deep with us.